We are so happy you all could be here to learn more about the candidates that are running for Baltimore City State's Attorney. First, I'd like to start by thanking Principal Matt Hornbeck and the rest of the Hampstead Hill Academy team, Tony's over there, for letting us use their space. And to all the candidates that took time out of their busy schedules to be here, we really thank you so much and welcome. And a huge thank you to Jerome Chester and Deborah Weiner from WBAL, who partnered with us tonight to bring you the forum and to host the forum, and who are also providing a live stream of the event so that people that couldn't be on site tonight can still, watch and partake. So on that note, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce WBAL's own news anchor, Deborah Weiner, who's going to be our moderator for tonight. And Deborah, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for having me. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me. How's the sound in the way back? Good. I guess if you couldn't hear me. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this. There's so much to discuss. I've known some of you a long time. Some of you I'm just meeting for the first time. But thank you to the Hampstead Association for asking me to moderate this event tonight and to be the sole panelist as well. So for the next 90 minutes, we will hear from Democrats, Mr. Tharu Vingaraja, Mr. Ivan Bates. Their names are on the ballot for the primary election. Ms. Roya Hanna, who is running as an independent, is not on the primary ballot, but will face the primary winner in the general election. The rules are as follows. Each candidate will be given 60 seconds to respond to a question, and after each candidate has answered, the candidates may take 30 seconds to engage another candidate, or respond to a question, or to an accusation from another candidate. Amanda will be our timekeeper this evening. The candidates will hear a warning bell. She'll do better. The candidates will hear a warning bell. There you go. And that indicates there's about 10 seconds left. And then a wrap-up bell. Stop talking, lawyers. Stop talking. As I indicated, will be asking the questions, but you have a voice tonight as well. So throughout the evening, if you need to ask a question, you have something that you want to ask the candidates, raise your hand, and someone from the association will come to you with a piece of paper and a pen, and then your question will ultimately make its way towards me. Okay? So we will start with introductions from each candidate. They will be 2 minutes each. And I'm going to do this in alphabetical order when it comes to the Democrats initially, and end our forum tonight with closing statements that will also run 2 minutes. So in alphabetical order with the Democrats, we will start for 2 minutes introduction from Mr. Ivan Bates.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivan Bates, and I'm going to be your state's attorney. Crime is absolutely out of control in our city, and we must do something about it. For me, it's pretty simple. What am I going to do? Well, one of the main reasons I want to do something is my daughter. She's 6. I remember being in playgrounds with her, being afraid. So many people are afraid in our city right now just to walk down the street. Do we want to raise our children here? Do we want to have a future here? Do we have a future? And the answer to me is yes. So for me, we have to do something about it. With my 25 years of legal experience, my prosecution plan to make sure if you have an illegal handgun, we hold you accountable, that's what we'll do, is hold people accountable. See, I understand how to make a change. I went to the United States Army right out of high school, learned leadership, teamwork, dedication, how to work together to get the job done. From there, I went to Howard University, graduated with honors, then to the oldest law school in America, William & Mary. Clerk for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in Los Angeles, moved to Baltimore in 1995, where I took care of my aunt. And then from there, I worked with the state's attorney's office for 6 long, good years. Started my own law firm in 2006 until now. First it was just me, now I have 16 people who work with me. I understand what we need to do, I understand how to make a change, and I understand how to hold people accountable. And I ask you, if you really want to make a change in Baltimore City, give me a chance. Thank you.
Let's go, Ivan.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. We're here tonight because we all believe in this city. We all love this city. We all know that it can be better than it is. The city is in crisis. Children are dying. The people that are supposed to be responsible for keeping us safe are not doing their job. My name is Roya Hanna, and I'm running for state's attorney because I know that the best days of Baltimore are ahead. The fate of my family was tied to this city from before I was born. It was 1970 when my mother crossed the ocean to teach math at Poly High School. She returned to the country of my birth, had me and my sister, and the next time they returned, it was under very different circumstances. They were fleeing a civil war in search of a better life, and Baltimore gave them a chance. They found jobs as teachers. My mother, first at Poly, finished her career at Morgan State. My father taught at Edmondson, at Douglas, at Southern, and at Western. When he retired just a few years ago, he was the oldest teacher teaching in the state of Maryland. He was 80 years old. He's 85 now. He doesn't look 85. He doesn't act 85. He doesn't like me telling people he's 85, but that's the tradition in which I was raised. It was a tradition of hard work, of public service, of faith. And my sister and I have done our best to do the noble work in their footsteps. We went to local public schools, Edmondson Heights Elementary to Woodlawn High. I went to Yale for college, Harvard for law school, was president of the Harvard Law Review, clerked on the US Supreme Court for Justice Stephen Breyer, who retires tomorrow. And then I returned home to serve as a federal prosecutor, as a city prosecutor, and then as Deputy Attorney General for the state of Maryland. I am running for state's attorney because I know that crime does not have to be out of control. I know that criminals can get a clearer message that there are consequences for their conduct. And this false choice between making the system safer and making our streets safer is not true. We can make our system fair and make our streets safer. And if you want to learn more, go to justiceforbaltimore.com. I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight. Thank you so much.
Ms. Hanna, thank you. I am Roya Hanna, and I'm running as an independent candidate for state's attorney because I believe it is imperative to get politics out of the business of public safety. And, you know, I also don't believe that crime has to be the story of Baltimore. All too often, we hear that crime has always been, and so it will always be, and I completely and utterly reject that notion. I know that with a little creativity and community collaboration, we can change the state's attorney's office around, we can change law enforcement and the criminal justice system around. I was a prosecutor for 12 years in this city. For 9 of those years, I tried murders and shootings. I never lost a homicide trial. Prior to that, I traveled around the country and I taught local prosecutors how to establish community prosecution and gun violence prevention programs. I know what works, and I know that I can bring that knowledge and experience to the state's attorney's office and make it work for all of us. You know, I've been in Baltimore. I moved here in 1997 for law school, and I fell in love with this city. But all too often, we see the city suffer crisis after crisis, and nobody is willing to step up and to do the work that is necessary. I often describe myself as a worker bee. I just want to do the work and to get it done, and I'm tired of politicians coming in and telling us what they're going to do and not having the experience and background to actually get the job done. I have twice as much of prosecutorial experience as any candidate in this race, and I hope that you learn more about me and my plan at royahanna.com.
Thank you all. We want to start with the news of the day. A Baltimore police sergeant is in fair condition at shock trauma tonight after he was dragged 2 blocks in Park Heights last night after a traffic stop. The suspect, arrested this morning, Joseph Black, is a habitual offender who has been arrested 19 times and recently served 22 months of a 15-year suspended sentence for 2 gun crimes. Are you going to have a policy whereby prosecutors do not participate or negotiate these type of sentences, specifically very little jail time for violent crimes? We start with Mr. Vignaja.
Look, this is pretty simple. If today was the first day that such a plea deal had been struck, it might have been the exception. But a few months ago, we learned about the case of Luther Trent. Ms. Hanna brought this case to our attention. I served as a volunteer advocate for the victims. They were individuals who were attacked by Mr. Trent in a midnight fire. They lit their house on fire trying to kill the 3 people. Mr. Trent was charged with 3 counts of attempted murder and arson, and he was pled out to a suspended sentence. When that happened, we asked ourselves, is Luther Trent the exception, or are there more of them? And Ms. Mosby would not tell us. Then we learned about Austin Davidson, the individual who shot and killed the Wicomico deputy. And today we're learning about this person. We now know that there is a pattern of this. When I started as a federal prosecutor, we had a very simple policy. There were guidelines that governed the appropriate sentence. And if you wanted to go above or below those guidelines, you needed to get supervisory approval. That's the way you not only ensure that justice is done, but that you have consistency across cases. That's what I would do as state's attorney.
Ms. Hanna, are you going to have a policy whereby prosecutors do not participate or negotiate these type of sentences, specifically very little jail time for violent crimes?
Absolutely. You know, Mr. Black, in this case, there was mandatory minimums. They could have invoked them. And I'm not saying that we need to invoke mandatory minimums for every single case, but for certain people, when they have a consistent pattern and when you can tell from their record that they're going to be right back here in a year or 6 months, yes, maybe a mandatory minimum would have been appropriate for Joseph Black. We know that he was charged with an attempted murder and a gun case. And in those 2 separate incidents, he received probation after having a robbery and a drug dealing and other violent crime. This man was a menace to society before he became a menace to the officer who was injured last night. And I just want to say, you know, that officer is in shock trauma and he is fighting for his life. And I know that he has the most devoted, loving family and has the most infectious belly laugh you can possibly imagine. So just keep him in your thoughts and prayers.
Amen.
Mr. Bates.
Yes, without a doubt, our hearts, our thoughts and prayers go out to that officer. But before that officer, Joseph Black got in a gun battle when he shot on our streets. And that was the first arrest for the gun. Then he was in a car and had another gun with him. This young man had 4 opportunities to go to prison. The state's attorney's office didn't do it. As I've said from day one, if you have an illegal gun in Baltimore City and I'm the state's attorney, you will go to jail. One of the things the criminal element doesn't do is the criminal element does not respect the criminal justice system. You must make them, the criminal element, respect the system. So yes, we will have a policy where you will go to jail with an illegal handgun. Yes, sir.
Mr. Bates and Mr. Vignaja, are you going to have a policy where prosecutors will not participate in these types of sentences? Will there be a specific policy? Because I think when you hear from people, when we have this story developed today, we all know this wasn't the first time. I've been in this town for 20 years and covered this story, many versions of this story again and again. So I think people want to know very specifically, is this a policy that you would in fact enact in the state's attorney's office if you are running the state's attorney's office?
I think there's some confusion because not everybody understands how this came about. During the pandemic, everything was done over Zoom. This young man was already out on electronic home detention, so they were home. During that time period, the judge was not getting involved in plea negotiation. It was only the state's attorney's office that was offering the plea negotiation. That was a plea offer from the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. Ms. Hanna talked about you could ask for 5 years minimum mandatory. When you look at that record, so yes, the issue here is just do your job, make sure if they have a legal handgun, we're asking for jail. So what I'm saying is that my policy will be, if you have a legal handgun, you're going to jail. Doesn't matter what anybody else says, that's what our policy will be. You will go to jail.
I want to ask all three of you. Obviously, Ms. Mosby is not here. We have invited her, but we did not hear back. But the incumbent did say today that the problem with this case, and with so many cases, this is her statement, these are not my words, that the problem is uncooperative and inconsistent witnesses. Now, without witness shaming, we all know that witnesses, many witnesses, are terrified, right? So it's not just that you're a bad witness, it's that you're afraid. So the question for the three of you is, how do you address that legitimate, understandable fear that people have if they go forward? They're next. So I guess I will start with you, Mr. Vignarajah, how you would respond to that.
Yeah, look, this has always been a problem. It's been a problem in Baltimore, it's been a problem all across the country. But when we drove murders below 200, it wasn't because people were knocking on my door saying, Mr. Vignarajah, I want to be a witness in your case. What we did was we developed strong cases, we developed relationships with these victims and witnesses, and we honored the risk that they took by making sure that we didn't give the case away. When in the case of Luther Trent, he was charged with 3 counts of attempted murder. There were 3 cooperative victims. There were 3 cooperative witnesses. There were 3 people that did exactly what we asked of them. And what did they do in that circumstance? They gave the farm away. They gave the farm away over the objection of the victims and witnesses. Not only does that send a terrible signal to Mr. Trent, as he went on national television and told everyone, it sends a terrible message to the victims and witnesses. In that particular case, Deborah, we were able to do something. We were able to go into court, file a motion, fight for the victims, and advocate, even as a private citizen, to convince the judge to rescind that plea. And Mr. Trent, thanks to that work, is behind bars today. But you have to honor the victim's risks by making sure that you do the work in court.
You know, I think we need to take witness intimidation seriously. We have had the current administration put out pleas on several witness intimidation cases that were probation or pretty close there too. When I had a witness intimidation, the defendant received 45 years just for intimidating the witness. Now, you know, that being said, we have to respect them, we have to provide them with more services, we have to help them move out of the area where they are in danger. But in this particular case, in the Joseph Black case, one of those cases was entirely police officers. So if she is saying that it's all because of witness intimidation, that doesn't make any sense, because it is entirely police officers, it was entirely caught on body-worn camera. So I don't think they have an excuse for the felony possession in the car case. Yes, I understand there were self-defense issues in the attempted murder, but they could have invoked the mandatory on the felony possession count.
I'm curious. The Fraternal Order of Police came out with a statement about an hour and a half ago saying that it wasn't just the state's attorney that was to blame. They feel that the mayor is to blame and the police commissioner is as well. Is that something you agree with? I'll start with you, Mr. Bates.
Well, can I answer the other question?
Absolutely.
So, when it comes to cases involving witnesses, if you go to my website, www.bates.baltimore.com, you'll see my prosecution plan. If you look at the second pillar, I talked about protecting victims and witnesses. Ms. Hanna's right. I talked about having a designated prosecutor to prosecute witness intimidation. That's how you let individuals know that you're going to take that issue seriously. And talk about using the tools that are already there in the system. Asking for protective orders to protect and hide the identity of our victims and witnesses. And I also decided that some of the things that I learned on the federal side, we want to bring them to the state side. Let's have the legislature actually pass a law, very similar to the federal side, it's called Jinx, that says we don't have to give the identity of a witness or victim and tell right before trial. That protects witnesses and victims, and they're now engaged and part of the system to get convictions.
Exactly.
Do the candidates want to comment at all on the Fraternal Order of Police and feeling that the responsibility for things like today, an officer being gravely injured, the story of a habitual offender, that it is collective blame, that is also the blame of the current mayor and also the blame of the police commissioner? Curious of how you all want to weigh in on this.
Look, I'll say this. The sergeant, who is, thank goodness, recovering, I don't think he'd appreciate that we spend today pointing fingers. There's a lot of blame to go around. Yes, everybody could be doing a better job. The police department could be doing a better job. The mayor could be doing a better job. The state's attorney's office could be doing a better job. And this is one example. But we shouldn't get too caught up in this particular example, because we have to realize, we have to recognize that this is happening in violent crime cases across the board. When 5 police commissioners came together for the first time in history and endorsed our campaign, they said, this is the prosecutor more than anyone else that our rank and file, that our detectives respected. And it wasn't because, we all hung out and I patted them on the back, it was because we did the work. That whenever we had a hard case, whenever we had a tricky case, we prepared it, we did it well, we took it to trial, we did the work to make sure that we were honoring the risks that the victims and witnesses took, and honoring the risks and the work that the police officers took. So, in the name of the sergeant, I don't think we need to engage in blame games. I think what we have to do is come together and realize that everybody has to do a little bit of a better job, but the state's attorney can lead that charge.
Think that everyone in the city is responsible for this. The mayor and the police commissioner and the city council, none of them step up and demand what we need from the state's attorney's office. They make veiled comments, but they don't hold hearings. They don't hold her to account. They don't say what is going on in your office. They have known for months, if not years, that all the experience left the state's attorney's office. They have known that she was down all these people, and they just held one budget hearing a couple of weeks ago. Yes, they need to make sure that no office in this city fails, and that everyone in the community is protected. So yes, the mayor and the city and the police commissioner, they have different roles, but this is chiefly on the state's attorney's office for not doing what they needed to do to make sure that a violent repeat offender was taken off our streets.
Let's move on to another question. We have so many, and we just had a number of very good questions come in as well. Do each of you think you have the personal history, the moral compass, and the stature to promote the integrity of the office? I will start with Mr. Bates.
For me, that's an easy question. Yes. When you look at my prosecution history, of the 6 years, I handled around 345 cases. Didn't have cases overturned. I wasn't reprimanded by the court. Unfortunately, Mr. Vignaraja, as a prosecutor, handled maybe 40 cases, maybe had 8 trials. One trial involved a gentleman named Mr. Toomer. That's where the court, after he had received a conviction, the Court of Appeals, and those are the judges that review what happened, they said that Mr. Vignaraja misled the jury to get a conviction. Then there's another case in Baltimore County. Last time Mr. Vignaraja was in court, said that he there misled the court. So we need an individual who's going to be a prosecutor that the system knows, the system trusts, and the system respects. That's clearly Ivan Bates. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm so proud of my career to have served as a federal prosecutor, city prosecutor, and then as Deputy Attorney General. I'm so proud of the leadership roles I've had over the course of my career, from being president of the Harvard Law Review to clerking of the U.S. Supreme Court. Every single person that I have tried and convicted is still behind bars. Every single case that I have ever tried, from homicides to carjackings to federal cases, resulted in the convictions. There are, of course, instances where I disagree with a judge or a particular ruling, but over the course and breadth of my career, I'm so proud of the outcomes. Here's what I think is important to understand. It's easy to pick holes and point fingers at others. I'm not going to do it. I didn't do it when we were behind in the polls. I'm not going to do it when we're ahead in the polls. The reality is that each of the campaigns has done a poll. It's on their finance reports. You can ask them what their polls are. We released our polls. We know that we're 20 points ahead. And when you're 20 points ahead, what you've got to do is start attacking. And so I welcome the campaigns that have decided to finally show up at forums, because they weren't doing it before, but then realized that they need to start showing up, that this is the time when they need to attack. It's that season. We get it. I'm going to stay above it. All right, let's have some fun. The reality is that they did a poll. People in their campaign told the world that they were down by a lot. They were in single digits. They were 25 points behind us and Miss Mosby. And after that, shortly after that, they started coming to forums. They started taking attacks. It's silly season. I get it. I've been behind too. And when you're behind, you feel compelled to do this kind of stuff. The consultants in the first lane are texting them to say these things. I get it. It's what you got to do in politics. But here's the reality. Here's the reality. This city wants change. Crime is out of control. Deborah asked us a question about the non-prosecution policy. And the answer, which Roya said, is very simple, which is we have to rescind that policy for two reasons. One, we don't have the ability to tell criminals that certain crimes are no longer criminal. That is a terrible message to send to criminals. And number two, it is really confusing to communities and cops to learn that certain crimes can be observed, can be investigated, and not be prosecuted. It's outrageous, and of course we reverse it on day one.
Follow-up to all three of you. If you reverse this policy, how would you ensure that communities of color are not disproportionately affected and public trust not further eroded? Plus, what about the resources to handle the caseload, which will...
If I may?
Yes.
It's a great question, because right now you don't have enough prosecutors in the state's attorney's office. There are prosecutors right now that are being asked to come from felony circuit court down to district court to handle misdemeanor cases because there aren't enough prosecutors. So the first issue is we got to make sure we address that deficit. But the second thing is, Deborah's exactly right. We have to have some internal guardrails. In a high-volume jurisdiction like Baltimore, where there's thousands, tens of thousands of cases, we can't take every loitering and trespass and public urination case to trial. We have to use our common sense judgment, as we always have. When I was chief of major investigations, the number of arrests had gone down from 100,000 to less than 40,000. So had the number of young black men incarcerated for petty offenses. So had carjackings and homicides and shootings. There's a way to responsibly reduce the number of arrests and to make the streets safer. We did it before, we can do it again. It requires common sense guardrails to make sure that we're triaging our resources and focusing on the violent repeat offenders. That's what we've always done, we just have to get back to it.
Without a doubt, we have to rebuild the state's attorney's office. If you remember, just a couple of days ago, I was endorsed by the Baltimore Sun. The Baltimore Sun said it was Ivan Bates that former prosecutors want to work with and work for. I'm the only one on this stage they want to come back and work with. So when we rebuild that office, because there's now $16 million more now that Ms. Mosby has in her budget than Greg Bernstein had in his, when Mr. Vigneroger was there doing a job as well. What we do know is that when people are there, they're energized, they do the job, they do the work. Now, in reference to these programs, they're already there. The money is already there. Greg Bernstein had a lot of these programs, and coincidentally, Greg Bernstein, who employed both of these individuals, has endorsed me in my campaign because he recognizes my vision. He recognizes that I know the money's there for drug treatment, the money's there for mental health, the money is there for all those course and projects. However, because we do not engage that, we do not have the individuals use it.
Ms. Hanna?
You know, currently the office is prosecuting about half as many cases as they did 8 years ago. So I do think there are the resources that are there, and like Mr. Vignaraj said, we do have to triage them properly. And yes, people will come back. I'm sure I get the exact same phone calls as Mr. Bates does. I just don't feel the need to go around telling everyone about it all the time. But yes, prosecutors will come back who have gone to other jurisdictions. They will make sure that we are able to effectively handle those cases when they come in. And we will make sure that diversion programs actually work for Black and brown communities and all communities in Baltimore City. We will make sure that we're not disproportionately affecting any one neighborhood and that crime is addressed citywide.
Before I go to some of our questions from the audience, since the issue of staffing is raised, there is a prosecutor shortage all over the country, Baltimore included, given low pay and burnout and concerns about racial justice. How do you address those very serious concerns and while encouraging talented, smart lawyers to choose a path of public service? How do you do that? How do you attract them? And how do you use your stature, right, back to that issue, your stature in the community to attract them? I'll start with Mr. Bates.
One of the things that I've done, I'm the only one who's done it, is I manage my own law firm. You can go to court all you want, but have you ever managed anybody? I have. I built a firm with only me, 16 people. So I understand how to motivate, how to lead individuals. We will be the great rebuild. We will bring prosecutors back who want to be prosecutors, who are alums of this great office, who want to be part of the solution. But we will also go and recruit young law students. I will go to University of Baltimore, University of Maryland. First year law students, first day. If you want to have a job when you graduate, come work with us. Because your first year you'll volunteer maybe 2 or 3 hours a week just to understand what's going on in the office. If you want to come, you can come. If you don't, you don't. Your second year will pay you and you'll learn how to look at body camera footage, understanding what's going on in the community. Your third year you'll write briefs and motions, and when you graduate you have a job. That allows us to get young talent with the seasoned veterans so that we can build a terrific office that suits and supports the citizens of Baltimore City.
First, we have to be clear about the fact that the shortage is nationwide, but the acuity of that shortage is unique to Baltimore City. There are jurisdictions across the state that are few prosecutors down. Baltimore County has 3 vacancies. Baltimore City has 60. So let's not pretend that what's happening in Baltimore City is the same as what's happening across the state. It is worse here. There is a problem here. When I left a big fancy law firm in DC and came to be an assistant U.S. attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Baltimore, it wasn't for the pay. It was because all of us, we grew up wanting to go to law school, dreaming of being that courtroom lawyer. We watched Law and Order, we did the cross-examination and A Few Good Men. That's why we got excited about law school. And so when Robert Morgenthau, the legendary DA of New York City, over the course of a 40-year career, built the greatest prosecutor's office in history, he didn't do it by paying people more. He did it by inspiring them, by telling them that they would learn more and do more good in New York City than they would anywhere else in the world.
Ms. Hanna.
You know, nobody goes into public service because they want to make a lot of money. And people are leaving the state's attorney's office to go to other government agencies where they're also not going to make a lot of money. But what they see in those government agencies is that they are going to get more respect. They're going to be given more discretion. They're going to be actually allowed to be a lawyer and not have to have everything run through their supervisors. And you know, I think as a manager, you do have to lead from the back of the room and make sure that you are giving your prosecutors the tools and resources that they need to actually do their job, and the training and encouragement. I'm the only one up here who's actually been involved in a systemic program of training prosecutors. You need to know how to make sure that they have everything that they need to be the best prosecutors that they can. And you know, this particular office, what I hear from prosecutors every day is that they feel disrespected by the front office. They don't need somebody who's going to talk down to them. They need somebody who's going to lift them up.
This question comes from the audience. As a younger I'm not sure what this one word is, but I think I can live without the adjective. So, as a younger resident, I struggle with even voting in the first place. Convince me why I should bother voting in a splintered election that favors an incumbent. So this question, we will start with the Democrats and Mr. Vigneroth.
Let me be very clear. There's 585,000 people in this city. Only 80,000 of them will vote in this Democratic primary. Your vote counts because this is a small election. And if you believe, as I do, that people pay attention, that people can learn over time, incumbency has an advantage. Marilyn Mosby was unbeatable 4 years ago. She was perhaps unbeatable 5 months ago. But today, I think the people have started to see that whatever she is trying, however hard she is working, however deeply she believes in her convictions, what she is trying is not working. We don't need to disparage her, we don't need to attack her, we don't need to point out all the things that have gone wrong, though there is much that has gone wrong and we have to be forthright about it. What we have to do is understand that desperate change is needed. And the good news, because my faith has always been placed in the people of Baltimore, the good news is that the people of Baltimore want change. The people of Baltimore are ready to elect someone new. And in a small election, this is not a presidential election where we're not a swing state. This is a small local election where 100 votes counts as almost 1%. Those are the kinds of things that can really dramatically change the outcome of the future of Baltimore.
Mr. Bates.
You know, when you think about the vote, for me, being African American, we didn't have the right to vote. People died for that right to vote. I want the Army to defend the rights of our country so that we could do that, just vote. I recognize our city doesn't have hope. Our city doesn't have a future in so many eyes of young people, but you do. And it just takes hard work. So when I think back about our campaign, think about all the volunteers. I think about the 14,355 doors we've knocked on in Baltimore City. I think about the people, the citizens who want to have change. I think about the grandmothers who's crying because they believe that I bring them that hope. I think about the opportunity to have our children play in a playground, our businesses be successful, and for you to be a part of that equation. And all you have to do is walk down, press that lever, and vote Ivan Bates for State's Attorney.
Sorry, if I could just, the question was about a splintered election?
Would you like to repeat it again?
Yes, please. I was confused by the answer.
As a younger resident, I struggle with even voting in the first place. Convince me why I should bother voting in a splintered election that favors an incumbent.
Yes, I don't know if this particular election favors the incumbent. I guess we will see in about 3 weeks. I am not in a splintered election. Whoever wins the Democratic primary will face me in November, and that is that. So I understand your issues with, trying to decide among 3 people who have very different approaches and are very different and all have other things going on. So I get it. I sympathize with you, but don't worry, I got you in November.
Let's move on to gun violence, which has taken its toll on families, communities, and the collective psyche of the city. Out of the gate, what would you do to address this? And can you provide a realistic timeline on when there may be a visible, palpable reduction in violent crime? I'm going to start with Mr. Vigneroth.
One of the things that I find most frustrating about politicians in Baltimore is they tell you that things will change in glacial paces. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. They point to the root causes of these problems. It ends up being an abdication of their responsibility to do anything in the immediate term. It's not that we disagree. Of course we have to fix our schools. Of course we have to restitch the fabric of the family. Of course we have to address trauma and mental health and addiction. But if you only focus on those issues, you will not understand that change can happen in 6 months, in 9 months. You should expect a reduction in homicides and shootings and carjackings in the very first year. You should expect a dramatic reduction in shootings and homicides and carjackings within 3 years. This is the same thing I have always said. And when we put out our plans, there is a level of detail, a level of precision, a timetable for when we would bring certain investigations, what units we would bring, when those partnerships would form, when the indictments would return, because we don't have time to wait. Yes, of course things will get better in 5 or 10 years, but you should expect results in 5 to 10 months.
I disagree. I don't think that we're going to see a depreciable reduction in just a few months. And the reason for that is the life cycle of a case. It takes about 18 months for a violent crime to go to trial. And so I think once we do put the procedures in place and actually strengthen these cases and have an initial review unit that can do that, we will see a result in reduction in violent crime once those cases start to make it through the system. It's also the cycle of a violent repeat offender. Violent repeat offenders get arrested about every other year. And so if you are actually building strong cases against those people, you should start to see a reduction as they get arrested and put in prison, but that does take some time. And you know, at the beginning of this race, I did say 2 years generally because that's the life cycle of a case. But honestly, even in the past 9 months, the state's attorney's office has declined to such a degree that I think the staffing issues are going to cause everything to take a little bit longer. So I'm still going and hoping for 2 years, but yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bates.
Yeah. It's quite simple. If you're not winning cases, the violent repeat offender is going to keep doing what they're doing. Right now, you have an office with 200 positions and only 133 prosecutors, of which the state's attorney's office, 15 to 20 of them don't even go to court. All hands on deck. I'll go to court, I'll go to trial, I'll take those trials. Once I start winning cases and other prosecutors start winning cases, you begin to see the change. Does it happen in 6 months, 8 months? Realistically, 2.5, more likely maybe 3 years. But day one, you'll see a change. You'll see a change because there'll be a collaborative working relationship. I have a program, Homicide Review, that brings the state's attorney's office, the police department, Safe Street workers. It brings the mayor's office of criminal justice and Johns Hopkins University. It brings all of us together to look at each and every single homicide, each and every single murder. We look at the data, we focus on individuals who have really good, strong, solid cases to hold those individuals accountable. Once you're winning cases, once you're holding people accountable, then the message gets through. Playtime is over, and now the citizens will have their city.
Mr. Vignarajah.
I think we actually agree about a lot of these things, but there's one thing that I wanted to sort of disagree with Ms. Hanna on, which is that it doesn't have to wait for the end of the case for the results to be seen in the community. One of the things that we really emphasize is the importance of bringing certain indictments, bringing certain concerted efforts, multi-defendant cases, using burglaries to get violent criminals off the streets, partnering with the feds to get carjackers off the streets in the months before June, July, and August, the killing months of every year. Because if you can get them off the streets, you have to, of course, convict them in due course, but you can expect to see results immediately. If you get the 200, 300, 400 most violent offenders off the streets with strong investigations, strong cases, I think you can expect to see results by that very first summer.
I recognize that sounds good, but Mr. Vignarajah had a case very similar to that. He locked up a lot of individuals over in Greenmount, 45. Then he left the office. That case fell apart, and violence went crazy in that neighborhood. It was taken down for a couple months while everybody was in jail. But because the cases fell apart, they weren't put together properly. And then when those individuals came home, the violence erupted in a way we'd never seen. You must make sure that you do things in a proper way. So though it sounds good, the reality of it wasn't. We must work together with the police department, building good, solid cases. And it's my program, my plan. It works in Milwaukee, it works in Oakland, and it will work here in Baltimore.
That is not what Homicide Review is. I was one of the individuals who actually went to Minneapolis and studied the Homicide Review program. And what Homicide Review is it involves the community. It looks at it and says, how can we prevent similar homicides to this in the future? It does not address the immediate homicide. It does not help to make that case stronger. That case is still the work of the detectives. You know, when I was in homicide, I would go down in the middle of the night and help them build stronger cases. We can build stronger cases, and Homicide Review is a very interesting program, but that is not what Homicide Review does.
I think it's really important to be clear about this. Rod Rosenstein brought 2 prosecutions in Cherry Hill. Just 2 prosecutions in Cherry Hill. Cherry Hill went 700 plus days without a single shooting. The case that Mr. Bates is referencing in the Green Mountain East neighborhood, one of the most violent in the country, that neighborhood, a 5-block radius, had a murder every month for 5.5 years. After the prosecution, it went 18 months, not a few weeks, 18 months without a single murder, not one. And you know what changed? You know the month that stopped? It was the month of Freddie Gray. That is what erupted and blew things up. It was not the terrific prosecution.
Yep. I'm glad you mentioned Freddie Gray because I want to go back to 2015. And when Marilyn Mosby came to the podium, you've all been very critical of the decisions that she made that day. What would you do differently? If you had taken to the podium during the civil unrest, as parts of the city were burning, what would you say to the people in Baltimore at the time? What would your responsibility be, Mr. Bates?
Well, it's not the responsibility of the state's attorney to stop the burning of the city. That's the mayor's job. What my job is to do as the state's attorney is to look at the evidence with an open mind, not rush to judgment. And that's what didn't happen in that case. If you have a case, you file the evidence. And then when you file the evidence, you work with your team to put it together to make sure you have strong, solid conviction. That didn't happen here. When I looked and found out what was going on in the Gun Trace Task Force, I followed the evidence. And I helped the U.S.
An unarmed person. Let me do my job. Let me investigate the case thoroughly. And once we do that, we will arrive at a just conclusion. But when you make it a fanfare, you shut down certain avenues of investigation. People stop talking and stop giving evidence. We needed more evidence in that particular case. We needed to get to the bottom of what really happened. We needed to have a thorough autopsy done. She planned the press conference before the autopsy came back saying how he died. I don't know how you can do that, and maybe that is because she has never tried a homicide before, but you need evidence, and she did not have it, and I would say to the people of Baltimore, let me do my job, and we will come out with the right and just outcome.
I don't think Mr. Bates and Ms. Hanna are wrong, but I think there is one part that is more complicated. It is easy from the cheap seats of history to judge the incredible predicament that Ms. Mosby faced. It is easy from the perch of hindsight to say, my God, how bad did she get it? I think the right thing to do would have been to take the steps of the War Memorial, but not alone, but instead with the mayor, with church leaders, with community leaders, with the police commissioner, and to say to the people of Baltimore, we are at a precipice. We are at a moment of history that will define Baltimore for a generation. And I need you, I beg you to let me, working with everyone, to do the right thing. Because what is popular is not always just, and what is just is not always popular. And my job is to do what is just. And if you want justice for Freddie Gray, if you want justice for the police officers involved, if you want justice for our city, you have to give me a chance to do the investigation, to do the work that prosecutors and police must do, to do the righteous thing that is right for the victim, for the police, and for the city of Baltimore.
Your time. No, okay. Let's talk about the police. And prosecutors cannot be successful, of course, without a good working relationship with the police. What should that relationship look like? And how do you create a balance, a healthy distance, while creating a relationship that fosters cooperation? I'll start with you, Mr. Bates.
Well, I think day one, you have to understand what's going on with the police department. I've told people day one when I get sworn in, I'm going to make sure I go to a roll call. I'm going to look each and every single officer in that eye and I'm going to tell them, we're in this together. Because being part of the team is important. Making sure that we're focused on working together. That officers recognize that our job is not to fuss, not to fight, but to make sure we serve and protect the citizens. And the way you build that, like any other relationship, is communication and trust. It's going to be difficult. Because it's not just the police department, it's also the citizens as well. Now, you want to make sure that you hold the police accountable, but you also want to make sure that they're doing the best thing they can. You cannot necessarily always look to embarrass anybody, but especially not the police, who they're your partner. It's important to recognize that when you have a do not call list, that you tell the police what's going on, that you inform them if they make a mistake, you give them the opportunity to have retraining. If they continue to make those same mistakes, and they've told you that they do not want to be police, and they cannot and will not be called by them.
Look, I'm proud to have the support of the police union. I'm proud to have the endorsement of 5 of Baltimore's venerated police commissioners. I'm proud of the things that they said in support of me about the relationships we built with police. We rolled up our sleeves. We went out to the districts. We went out to crime scenes. We worked with them day and night to make sure that we were honoring the victims, the 24 mothers that stood behind me a week ago and said that we lost our children. We're placing our faith, our hope in Through to make things a little bit better, a little bit more just. In order to rebuild that relationship, you absolutely, Mr. Bates is right, you absolutely have to signal that criminals have to be treated like criminals and cops need to be treated like heroes.
You know, I often hear police officers say that the person who hates a bad cop is more strongly is a good cop. And I think that really is true. And there are a lot of good cops, but they need to be encouraged to come forward and to report what they see as wrong. And you know, I think when you are clear, when you set out the standards, when you help train police officers, because I don't think that they go into that profession intending to do wrong. I think they sometimes need more help in training, and they need to better understand the Constitution and what is expected of them. When you make your expectations clear, when you work with them to root out corruption in their ranks, I think everything will flow from there, and you will strike the right balance.
Yes, Mr. Bates.
I think it's important that we don't call cops and raise them up all to be heroes. See, I played a role in bringing to justice the Gun Trace Task Force. They were cops. So are those the heroes that you're talking about? The heroes are the mothers. They're the fathers. The heroes are the people that are living in these blighted neighborhoods who are afraid to go out. See, we have to remember who are the people we're here to serve and protect. The police, they're part of the puzzle, part of the equation, but they're our teammates. But the citizens of Baltimore, now those are the heroes.
A few local topics since we are in Canton. Some of these questions came from residents here, and one question had to do with carjackings. Carjackings are up in the Southeast District in recent years. Why do you think this is happening, is the question, and what impact can the state's attorney's office have in reversing this trend? I'll start with Ms. Hanna.
You know, I think carjackings are the new version of joyriding. It is incredibly violent, but it is mainly committed by the youth of the city, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. I think that we need to change the way we handle juvenile crime. We need to start an early juvenile intervention program. We need to address truancy issues in this city. I understand that that will not solve the problem immediately, but the fact of the matter is, these are very young people who are committing these crimes, and we need to do more outreach to engage them. But when they do actually cross that line and do actually do the carjacking, we need to hold them accountable. We need to make sure that if they do that with a gun, that they are incarcerated. And it may be for a brief period of time, but they need to be held accountable, and they need to know that this is not an acceptable lifestyle and this is not an acceptable behavior.
Mr. Vigaraja?
You know, carjackings are up for 2 reasons, exactly as Ms. Hanna said. One is security systems in cars have become more sophisticated, so it's harder to do it the old-fashioned way, so they have to steal these cars from live victims. The other reason is because crime overall is up. And if you're going to spend your day doing robberies and burglaries, you start your day doing a carjacking. On the very first week of our campaign, we outlined a 5-part plan to address carjackings specifically. Number 1, we're going to refer federal carjackings to federal prosecutors. Not every burglary is a federal case. Not every homicide is a federal case, but every carjacking is a federal case because every car operates in interstate commerce. We're also going to provide financial subsidies, just like State Farm does, by reducing your insurance premiums, to put a GPS tracking device in your vehicle. This won't be used until a jack alert goes out that would connect with the license plate reader systems. These are the kinds of things that take advantage of the infrastructure that's there, take advantage of the partners that can do this work, and take advantage of the creativity that we need to bring to bear on a national but also local level.
When you do look at carjackings, the individuals who are doing it are young juveniles, unfortunately. But let's first look at the juvenile system to understand how we got here. 50%, almost 50% of all juvenile cases are dismissed. So we're missing the opportunity to change that behavior at an early age. Why? These youth they're poor. They come from bad, rough, tough environment. But that still doesn't excuse them to have to do that to the citizens of Baltimore City. There are no certainty of consequences. And the one thing that every single juvenile is using is a handgun. See, we don't have the infrastructure in the state's attorney's office to have all these specialized units. But what we'll do, if you have an illegal handgun, you'll go to jail, you will be held accountable. See, we'll do that in trainings so that there will be certainty of consequences. And that's what Johns Hopkins study said to do in reference to guns. So whether it's a carjacking, an armed robbery, or shooting, you still have the foundational piece, which is the handgun. I have to hold you accountable. I have to send you to jail. And that's how we change what's going on with carjackings.
Also, a question about larceny and larceny from auto, which are very common crimes occurring in the Canton area. What will be your strategy to get these numbers down in Canton and similar neighborhoods, and will these crimes be prosecuted? We'll start with Ms. Hanna.
Yes, those crimes will be prosecuted. You know, there's a crime called rogue and vagabond, which is really larceny from auto and possession of burglary tools and trying to steal from cars. Ms. Mosby put that on the list of crimes that she is not prosecuting. And I really think it's because she didn't understand what the crime was, but yes, that crime will absolutely be prosecuted. People shouldn't have to have their cars broken into and have to pay to have their windows replaced or anything of that nature. I think that there are a lot of things that we can do. You know, I went door knocking in Canton a few weeks ago, and every single house almost has a Ring camera. We need to better partner with the community so that we actually are identifying these people who are clearly going to be caught on Ring cameras because they're doing it right in front of people's houses. So I think with that, we can solve this problem.
Mr. Bates.
Yes. We have decided that we're not going to prosecute those crimes, such as Ms. Hanna stated. I will prosecute those crimes, as I've always said. And why? Because a lot of times are these crimes of the opportunity, or they crimes because maybe an individual may be addicted to drugs or have some other issues. We will make sure of holding people accountable and prosecuting them and directing them to the services they need. They will be held accountable. For instance, if it's drug usage, then we'll make sure those individuals go to inpatient drug treatment programs. But now in terms of working together as a group with the Ring cameras, we see that. Archie McFadden's over there in Patterson Park, phenomenal neighborhood organization. He is an individual that's already working with his neighbors with these cameras. That's what the state's attorney's office will do. They'll partner with the neighborhoods. It's already being done. People are already doing that work in our community. And that's what makes Baltimore beautiful. Because it's your neighborhood, your community, you know the problems. We will partner. We don't need to lead, but we just need to be your partner so we can work together to put good cases, to have the convictions, to hold people accountable.
Look, I know it's a debate, and I don't like to say this, but on this one, Ms. Hanna and Mr. Bates are exactly right. It's exactly right. We have to make sure that we bring those rogue and vagabond prosecutions. I'd like to think Ms. Mosby knows what that law is. It's when you walk down the street and you try to touch every handle, hoping that one of those doors will open. But it is one of the tools in the toolbox. And Mr. Bates is right. A lot of those people are victims of addiction. They're not out there to steal the car for a joyride. They're looking for $20 in the center console so they can buy a heroin around the corner. And to make sure that we use the tools like Rogue and Vagabond, to use the network of cameras that are not only in Patterson Park, but need to be in neighborhoods all across the city, to use those tools to get them the help that they need, that's exactly what we should do. It's not rocket science, it's basic blocking and tackling. And one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about how quickly we can make a difference is because that basic stuff is not being done right now. Returning to that itself will bring daylight to this problem.
As we wind up, we have about 15 minutes left, and we had promised some candidate-specific questions, some of which are from the audience and some of which are mine. So let's start with Ms. Hanna. You pulled out of the Democratic primary to run as an independent, which some see as merely a political calculation to ensure that your name is on the November ballot. What makes you independent? And how are you most different from the 3 Democrats in this race?
You know, I think all of the other candidates are excellent politicians. And I started this race not really wanting to be a politician. I didn't want to tell people what they wanted to hear without being able to back it up with actual practical experience. And so, you know, I did back out of the race as a Democrat because I thought there are so many people from all different parties and all different backgrounds who have good ideas about how we can change the public safety issues in Baltimore and how we can better address those. And I didn't want to be limited to any one particular side. Yes, on July 20th, 2/3 of the voters will be disappointed. But yes, and there is a certain political calculation, but I think I am independent because I'm rejecting the notion of politics being pivotal to the state's attorney's office.
Anyone want to add to that? The other 2 candidates? No.
Look, I think Ms. Hanna's a pretty good politician. I think it's a pretty savvy move. So.
Mr. Vignarajah, you recently left a political forum early, creating speculation online that you didn't want to specifically address issues that had to deal with your leadership style. How do you address that this evening?
Yeah, look, this was an unfortunate miscommunication. The forums that we have gone to, and I've gone to more forums along with Roya than anyone, the forums we've gone to typically run about 45 minutes an hour. There's typically multiple candidates that are in there. And we had another commitment. To be very clear, when we heard that there was some concern, we stuck around for 1 hour and 15 minutes. We had another commitment. We ended up being late to that other commitment. And be clear, I've never dodged any question on any issue ever. I've attended every forum. I've attended every town hall. I think I'm the only person, maybe with Ms. Hanna, who can say that, to suggest that I was worried about asking or answering questions that have been tossed out before. I just think that's an unfortunate misreading of that moment. We should have communicated more clearly that we had another commitment, but it was a 2-hour forum for 2 people. Edmondson Village doesn't get that time. Roland Park shouldn't get that time either.
How would you address the question of how you interact and treat staff and subordinates?
Yeah, look, you know, this is an issue that has come up 4 years ago, 2 years ago. It's political season, and these kinds of things do come up. I'm proud of the record that I have built. I'm proud of the roles that I have had, not only at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level, but in other roles as well. As the CEO of one of the largest CDFIs in the country, where we have $900 million in revenue and hundreds of folks that report to this incredible institution. I'm proud of the fact that I read the Harvard Law Review. These are leadership roles that I've had over the course of my career. But Deborah, you're right about one thing. I'm not perfect. I have learned and grown as a manager, as a person, as a leader. And I think some of the things that I've learned make me stronger and more capable of leading in this moment. This is a very special moment of crisis. We have a tragedy that is unfolding on our watch, and we need to be able to do something about it. The chances that I've had to lead in a wide range of contexts has made me stronger. I'm not perfect, but I love the city. I'm going to do my best to be the best leader the city needs.
Is, Mr. Vignarajah, did you in fact write those text messages to your subordinates who you worked with and who worked for you, yes or no?
You know, this is the kind of political attacks that you have to do when you're down. Let's be very, very clear. We're not going to get...
Let's give Mr. Vigneraj a chance to speak, please, and be respectful. Thank you.
Look, the things that people have said about me, the things that this particular person has written about me, I stopped being surprised by what this blogger writes a long time ago. I also stopped commenting about it. I also stopped reading the blog. I am not going to get drawn into a conversation when nobody in Baltimore except our opponents want to have it. They want to talk about carjackings and killings. That's the questions that the community are asking, and those are the questions that I'm going to stay focused on.
The most important question the citizens ask are, how are we going to rebuild the office? If we can't rebuild the office, we cannot focus on carjackings. We cannot win cases. And if we haven't looked, almost 75% of the individuals going to law school right now are women. So if women do not want to be a part of the office, you cannot rebuild it. Yes. So yes, it is an important question. It's either a yes or no. But if you're not able to answer the question, sometimes your words, we have to believe who you are when your actions show us.
No, Mr. Bates, I'm not going to get drawn into this. I think you don't want to bring up your indiscretions any more than anybody else wants to. We're not going to go there because that's not what this debate is about. One of the reasons why our opponents, Ms. Mosby and Mr. Bates, are trailing in the polls is because these are the kind of venomous attacks that they bring forward. And all you have to, our poll, in all the polls that have been published and in all the polls that they have done, we are leading, and that's what you have to do. And the people of Baltimore want to have a conversation about merits. They're not going to get distracted by your questions, nor are we.
The people want to have, the people of Baltimore want a leader who has integrity. The people of Baltimore want a leader they can trust. And the people of Baltimore want a leader, when you ask a yes or no question, you give them a yes or no answer.
Would you like to say anything else, Mr. Vigneraj?
No, thank you.
Okay. We're going to move on to a question for Mr. Bates. You have said that if you win, and you mentioned it tonight, that the night you're sworn in, one of your first stops will include a police roll call. But as a defense attorney, a successful defense attorney, who has questioned facts presented by police in trial, as defense attorneys do, why are you the one to earn their trust and repair what is no doubt a very strained relationship with the office of the state's attorney? Why you?
That's an excellent question. Right now, our city doesn't have trust in the prosecution. They don't have trust in the community. See, one of the things when you're a defense attorney, especially in the African-American community, you're just their attorney. See, there's no defense attorney. It's the person that they reach out when they have a question about their mother, their father, their aunt, their uncle. There's a car accident that happened. What should we do? So right there are the trust of the community. But now the police department, as many people know, last time I represented Sergeant Alicia White in the Freddie Gray matter, I stood up and I had an officer's back. But I also was the one that talked about the corruption and gun trace task force. And I held officers accountable. See, I'm about doing the right thing, and the officers can tell that. I was a former prosecutor for 6 years and have that managerial experience that the officers need and they like. It's that leadership that they gravitate to. It's understanding that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. When they understand that my word means something and that I'm the person that they want to follow and be a part of. It's my vision that they like, it's my determination, it's my leadership that says, you know what, we can do this together.
Guilt beyond a reasonable doubt can be very tough to achieve in Baltimore, given the history of racism and the distrust of police. What is your specific plan to train prosecutors to be ready for trial and to address this reality? Because in the end, I'm sure you will all admit, you want to win cases, and you want to have that conviction rate that has been so talked about in the last few months. So how do you address that when you know that is a reality for jurors in Baltimore City? I will start with Ms. Hanna.
Well, I think there's a couple of different things that we need to do. First of all, we need to recognize that the cases these days are more complicated than ever before. Even in small cases or not things that are not homicides or whatnot, you have DNA, you have video camera, you have to get into evidence. And a lot of these prosecutors don't have the basic skills to get that sort of evidence in before the jury. So you need to establish a comprehensive training program, mock court, have a mentorship program so that they can go to other prosecutors and ask them how to do these things. You know, one of the big problems with the state's attorney's office is they've lost all of the experience. They don't have people who they can go to and just say, I have this issue, you had it last week, what did you do? And we really need to develop that level of experience and also to have trial teams so that we can bring younger prosecutors up and make sure that they have the skills when they move into the higher positions.
This is going to be a critical part of making sure that we are successful. I was part of a mock trial team, and in some respects it starts with simple things in high school and in college. You try to find people that really do love the idea of learning. And the second thing that you do is you make sure they get lots of opportunities. They get to be second chair to more senior cases. When I was a federal prosecutor, each and every case that we had second chairs. Part of it was to make sure these cases were being treated seriously. Part of it was an opportunity for training. The other part of it is to recruit some of these excellent former judges to come back to the office to make sure that there's great trainers. And then you've got to let them learn. You've got to let them do what they fell in love in the law to do. And those kinds of things require opportunities for them to win cases. Burglary cases are a great opportunity for us to go ahead and make sure that young prosecutors are getting experience. They often involve DNA and fingerprints. Right now, we're not testing that evidence. We need to bring those cases back because they are a great training ground to make sure we succeed.
One of the things I definitely talked about was having a seasoned veteran attorney with a younger attorney. These younger attorneys have the opportunity to learn in a way that's on-the-job experience. It's the only thing they can teach. But you also must have training sessions. One of the things that I've been able to do, I've done cases all around the United States. Currently, I'm doing triple homicide in Los Angeles. And I've learned things from those detectives I've never seen before. The way they're able to put their cases together. So it's not just training your prosecutors, but also making sure we work to train the police to put together better cases. They train each other. In terms of young prosecutors, guess what? You're going to have to come once a month on a Saturday training session. I did when I was a young prosecutor, and it was one of the best things I ever was able to do. You also make sure that you'll do the difficult cases. Just because it's a difficult case doesn't mean that we're going to give it away. Because when you lose sometimes in those difficult cases, you win with the experience. So it's all of those things put together is how we'll train and how we will build that office. After all, I'm that person that the former alums want to come back, work with, help, and support.
Thank you. The last question before we get to our final statements this evening is a simple yes or no question. To a complicated case, but a simple yes or no question. Would you, as state's attorney, continue to prosecute the case against Keith Davis Jr., the second most tried man in America? Yes or no, Ms. Hanna?
Yes.
You would continue?
Based on what I've seen so far, I haven't reviewed the file. I would need to thoroughly review the file before I make any final determination, but I do not believe that at this point I can say I'm going to dismiss the case without reviewing it and consulting with the victim's family. The victim's family do have rights, and we need to respect their rights. So at this point, the answer would be yes. If I get in there and I see something that I don't like, then I'm
Mr.
agreed to
Bigger,
change my answer.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna.
It's a very difficult question because we don't know enough from the outside about what the case is. It's also a very difficult question because the prosecutorial rules of ethics ask private citizens who are seeking that role not to comment on cases with respect to the decisions to charge. So unfortunately, Deborah, as much as I would like to tell you what my instinct is, yes or no answer is not appropriate under the rules of ethics here.
I have to give a yes or no. Come on.
Are you leaning one way or the other?
You know, I think that's a fairer question, but I don't know that it permits me an opportunity to answer because I don't know all of the evidence. I have not spoken with the victims, and I don't think there's an exception to comment on cases outside of the courtroom by saying I'm leaning one way or the other. Forgive me.
That's up for the voters to forgive you or not, but I do appreciate the nuanced response. Mr. Bates, yes, no, or?
I've always said from the beginning of this campaign, I will not prosecute Keith Davis Jr. a sixth time. Prosecute an individual over and over and over and over again until you get a guilty finding is wrong. See, people in this city don't believe in the criminal justice system. And this case is one of the main reasons. If we're really going to heal as a city, if we're really going to be able to change what's going on, we have to do it in a way that people begin to have trust, belief, and faith in our system. And Keith Davis Jr., for so many citizens of Baltimore City, is that case. I will not prosecute Keith Davis Jr. a sixth time.
And our closing statements, we will start with Mr. Vignaraj.
Thank you again for coming. Thank you again for caring so much about this race. In the first week of our campaign, the governor of Maryland, the Republican governor of Maryland, endorsed our campaign. It was the first time he'd ever crossed party lines and endorsed a Democrat. It signaled to our campaign, it signaled, I hope, to the city that this moment is different. These bullets don't have party affiliation. The tombstones of those slain on the streets of Baltimore do not bear the markings of race or creed or party. We have to put the bickering and the pettiness aside. I am proud to have been the only prosecutor that served at the state, federal, and local level. I'm the only prosecutor that has managed large, complex institutions as a partner at DLA Piper, as a president of Harvard Law Review, as the CEO of the largest CDFI in the country. I'm also the only one who knows that in this moment, perhaps different from other moments in history, what we don't need is an eloquent advocate, what we don't need is a career defense attorney, what we need is a proven prosecutor. The people of Baltimore have an incredibly important decision before them. You should go and look at the plans, look at the history, look at the experience, and then understand that in this moment, in this precious moment, you have a chance to do the impossible. Nelson Mandela once said, "They will tell you it is impossible until it is done." For too long, people have said you can't make the system more just and make the streets more safe. You can't bring murders below 203 years. You can't reverse these things without addressing the core challenges that are at the heart of our city. I respectfully disagree. My mom and dad crossed an ocean and lived the American dream. I have been the beneficiary of those blessings, and all I want to do with all my heart is pay it forward and help make Baltimore the city that made me.
This is the most important election in our city. People ask me about it all the time. I'm the only person on this stage that's knocked over 14,000 doors. When I'm in the community, people want that change. They want to know, what are you going to bring? What are you going to do? They don't ask about polls, because they know polls don't count. They don't vote. You vote. And it's simple. Unless you want the incumbent, then you have to vote for Ivan Bates. Clearly, we're talking about proven prosecutor, but you don't want to answer the real hard questions. We have to have a person who's going to be a leader, because that's what our city needs right now more than anything. We want a person who's not going to just point fingers, but who's going to work with everybody, who's going to work with the police and give hope to the citizens. A person who's not afraid to walk around in the community, that understands the plight, what it means to have those handcuffs placed on them. But also understand what it means when that victim's family has lost their loved one. Having been a defense attorney as well as a prosecutor, I understand. Having built my own law firm from scratch, I know how to manage. And that is why, whether it's the Baltimore Sun, whether it's been Greg Bernstein, Mary Miller, Sheila Dixon, I can go on and on and on and on, have endorsed my candidacy, because they recognize the faith, the hope, and understanding that the new chapter is here. So Baltimore, I ask you one thing. If you honestly want to change, a change for better, a change in which you now believe in. Give Island Base a chance, and we will make this chance together.
You know, I want to spend my closing remarks talking about what it is to be a prosecutor. A prosecutor has to do the hard things. They have to stand up for the people, for what is right and just, even if sometimes the victims don't want to proceed, which obviously the defendants don't want to proceed. And you are standing there, all on your own, doing what you believe is right. And this race is about principles and about standing in for what you think is right. I do not think that people who take an oath to be fair and impartial should then also pledge allegiance to any particular party, because fairness and impartiality has to come first. And that is why I'm running as an independent. Again, I have more experience than anybody on this stage and than the incumbent. I have tried more cases. I know how to build stronger cases, and I know what that office needs because I am there every single day. I talk to prosecutors every day. I know what is going to help make their lives better and help make the lives of the defendants better. And you may find those two things to be different, but the reason for that is people want justice. And if you are building rock-solid cases and dismissing things that should never be charged in the first place, you will have a fairer system. And that is what this city needs, is a person who will stand up and do the hard work and build these stronger cases so we can have a stronger city. And so I ask that you go to royahanna.com and sign the petition so that I get on the ballot in November and hopefully vote for me in November. Thank you.
Thank the three candidates who are here this evening. Thank you for your responses, and I appreciate you being here and answering all of our questions. I have another job to go do, so I will head to that shortly, but thank you for having me. Canton as well, I appreciate it.
Coming out tonight. I know it's been a long night. It's 9 o'clock. Everybody's ready to go home. So, you know, just if you are interested in hearing more about the Canton Community Association and getting volunteering for us, it'd be amazing. Check out us on www.cantoncommunity.org, or you can email us at info@cantoncommunity.org.com. So, thank you all, everyone. Thank you to the